Fancy backdrop.
It is a fancy backdrop. Folks, like that's like Zach Osterman. This is
We're
we're in a different spot today.
Good center.
The room where we normally do this was taken for the Minnesota post-game press conference. Are you okay? Are you?
I'm just trying to make it center. You don't care about no cinematography. I mean, I guess that's.
We're recording with my computer webcam. I don't.
You think Landman is true art?
It is true art. Indiana 82, Minnesota 67. I mean, like, I don't know, like, basically what this game should have been for Indiana, broadly speaking. They didn't start particularly well defensively. Once they locked it down, there was a stretch, about 11 and a half minutes in the first half, where they outscored Minnesota 24-9, and it was never really a game again after that. They probably could have run, like, they probably missed an opportunity to run the score up a little bit more. A lot of that, I think, really weirdly was free throw shooting, which has actually been such a strength this season, but tonight only 18 of 29. If they make 5 or 6 more of those, obviously the score looks even more lopsided. But, I mean, Minnesota's a bad team. Indiana played them like a bad team. Indiana won comfortably, and they're 1-0 in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I think that was part of Mike Woodson's frustration after the game. He wasn't sort of thrilled with some of the offense, and I think it was mostly the second half, sort of the last 10 minutes, when you felt like they could have probably pushed this to almost a 30-point win, but instead Minnesota kind of chipped away at things. And Indiana scored a tie season high with 44 points in the first half. I mean, shot 56% for the game.
On a night when they didn't shoot well from
three range. So I think that was sort of his sort of sense that, look, it was a nice win. You probably played a little, especially defensively. There were some good stretches there, I think, to build on. But at the same time, you let your foot off the gas a little bit, and the final score doesn't look as sort of dominant as the game felt it was.
And I mean, I think that is when I say frustrating, I don't know if people are frustrated with this team or not. I think some probably
fans are frustrated.
Yeah. That's just kind of what it feels like. People's issue with this team primarily is that there are moments, Huberazzi says a real defensive effort in the first half and broke open the game, and it very much did. 9 points in 11 minutes. That was when Indiana just kind of put clear blue water between them and Minnesota.
Minnesota didn't have a field goal for 8 minutes. Those 8 minutes.
Yeah.
At 1 point. So.
And that was Indiana flipped a 2-point deficit into a 13-point lead at halftime. You watch this team and you feel like it's frankly just capable of more. And listen, it's.
They scored them too. It was worth noting they scored 82 points when Miles Rice, Trey Galloway, and Luke Goody combined for 5 points and 2 field goals. So I mean, this was an 82-point night with only half your people contributing.
And that even that is when you put it on box.
Because you got to vision.
That is another part of sort of if you're buying this team, or at least its potential, that's another part of it, is the idea. I mean, there were 5 players in double figures in scoring tonight, and you mentioned, two of their most consistent offensive players, 2 starters combined for 3 points, and Luke Goody, who I thought had some really good moments defensively, but just kind of it just wasn't his game offensively. That happens. It's hard because it's really easy to look at the Louisville game in particular, and I don't want to zoom all the way out here, but
big picture.
Big picture. It's really easy to look at the Louisville game in particular and just kind of assume this team's never going to figure it out. But there are plenty of teams in college basketball annually that get on this ride where you say could be really good. They spend a couple months kind of, fumbling around trying to figure it out, and then eventually they do, and they turn it on. And I'm not guaranteeing this team will, but yet again, against Minnesota's not a good team, but against certainly just a higher caliber of athlete, a more skilled roster than some of what they've seen in non-conference play at home, they look the same as they did against Eastern Illinois, against Sam Houston State, where you just think you can see it. They just don't do it consistently enough. And the question basically remains, will there ever come a point when this group does just put it all into place and hold it there for an extended period of time? Because if they do, then that's when a game like this turns a 15-point win turns into a 25-point win.
Yeah, and we've seen them. I mean, I think what fans feel is look, there's only so much excitement that this can generate when in weeks' time when they go to Nebraska, they just look like they fall backwards again, or against another good team in a month, they don't have the effort. The effort's not there. I think that this IU team, this one in particular, has to sort of earn. I mean, even though they're 8-2 now, 7-2, 8-2. They have to earn back the trust a little bit because just of how poorly they played the Bahamas against the best teams that are going to be Gonzaga's probably the best team that's going to be on their schedule.
Maybe. Louisville was the big one. Louisville was the one.
Louisville was a team where last year, this is a whole new roster. They should have all the excuses of, we need time to gel.
Yeah.
And, they looked like a team.
And have again, Louisville's come crashing back to earth too.
Right.
They lost to Ole Miss, and
so they aren't just a team that was better than expected.
Right.
They were very much an outlier.
And so I understand people who are just kind of not there yet with this team. And I think we said either on our last postgame press conference or postgame podcast or in another podcast or something, I think I said to you that, Nebraska to me is kind of this team's next chance to win some faith back, to win some trust back. But the flip side, give them some credit for this. There's good seasons are built partly on just doing what you need to do with a minimum of fuss.
Well, but there's been
we
some
have
fuss.
seen,
But
there wasn't tonight, is my point.
Not as much. No.
They're really Indiana led for 31 minutes and 53 seconds this game. It was never in single digits in the second half for a second. Again, it was a little bit okay, stop playing with your food. But on the other hand, Indiana found the weak points in what Minnesota could not stop, primarily in and around the paint, and just never got to a place where Minnesota could take that away from them. Minnesota's only close in this game because Indiana allows it to be close with some sloppy turnovers late, with some missed free throws.
I think the counterpoint to that is you see a path for a bad team competing because it's the same way that all these bad teams have competed. Minnesota's just not a three-point shooting team. Only 2 for 11, 0 for 6. If they hit 3 more three-pointers, this is probably a game. Or any sort of had any sort of shot. They had no shot. And they've been all season, they've been a bad three-pointing team. And that's what Indiana's problem is. And so it just feels like, it's like this team is so capable. And I think, especially particularly on offense, just so capable on offense. But will they ever hit that ceiling? And will they ever sort of put it all together? I just don't know, because it also, I do think it is concerning that we're a month and a half in. You haven't had a game where there aren't at least 2 or 3 players where just they look out of it. Like Miles Rice, I don't know if his ankle was bothering him coming to the game.
Well, let's be fair. Rice had 5 rebounds and 4 assists. Point guards and I thought you could say this about Luke Goody's defense as well. The luxury of a team like this, if it works, when it's working, is you don't have to go forcing offense. And I think sometimes, if anything, that was one of the numerous things that got Indiana into trouble in the Bahamas, was guys thinking, oh man, I've got to go make this happen. Whereas a night like tonight, Miles Rice can look around and say, we are killing them in the glass or in the paint. We're killing them on the glass. Indiana was plus 13 on the boards. Indiana doubled Minnesota on offensive rebounds, which is not something that has happened much this year at all. And so a player like Rice can just say, hey, listen, I'm just going to let the game kind of flow. Because the flip side is, I understand that he has 2 points, but he only takes 4 shots, which means he figures out early on it's somebody else's night offensively. And I also thought he was really important because Indiana finishes this game with, I think, what is it? I'm looking for it now and I can't find it. Forgive me, 18 fast break points, which is a pretty decent number. And I thought, particularly at the point when the game really started getting away from Minnesota, Rice's hold on the tempo of the game was something Minnesota couldn't break. That he was controlling how fast the game was moving, and Indiana was getting a lot of offense, either just straight transition offense or very early offense in, sort of its half court sets, because Rice was moving Indiana quickly. And again, it's it's just sort of
you're not going to win most games with that. Your production for your backcourt is that. I guess is my point. We're not looking for any sort of offense.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yes, they facilitated decently enough.
Kenny Carlisle and Bryson Tucker, though, combined for 30 points on 18 shots, 9 rebounds, and 6 assists.
Who do you think Mike Woodson was calling out for being selfish?
I don't know.
Somebody was saying something. It wasn't Rice, because Rice didn't shot 4 shots. It wasn't Galloway. He only had 1 shot. I was just curious. Was he pinpointing somebody specifically?
No, I don't know.
Did you watch that second half and think somebody was being overly selfish?
I did think there were some times when
too quick of a shot.
Indiana's jump shooters leaned into, like Mbako Tucker, and that's always kind of a difficult balance to strike, because you want those guys to be aggressive.
Because they were in the flow of the game. They shot.
You don't.
12,
There
was 6 of 10.
There were a couple moments with Mbako where you just sort of thought you probably didn't need to take that shot. But again, with guys like that, you don't want You don't want to be. You don't want them playing too tight. You don't want them saying, "Oh, don't shoot that," because that's part of their offense. And there's going to be nights we've seen it before with Mbako, for example, where there's going to be nights where he has 25 points because he's taking those shots, because he's in rhythm, he finds his rhythm, and he just kind of his offense is coming quick and early. I mean,
I think the other big thing we should talk about is that so Galloway started and Carlo came back, missing 3 games. Carlo comes off the bench. Has his best game of the season, 14 points. It's 3 3-pointers, 5 assists. I think all 3 of those guards had times where they were the primary ball handler on the floor.
And that's felt like something new for Carlisle tonight.
And
how much the offense went through him.
And he looked, I asked him about it. Looked more comfortable. I just felt like, and I asked him if the pressure, taking the pressure up by coming off the bench, did it help him at all? He said no. I was just sort of getting in the flow. But and Woodson didn't kind of commit to any specific lineup going forward. I thought this was the right decision for how they should structure it, that Galloway should start Carlisle off the bench, especially him as a defensive sort of stopper. I do feel like this is the lineup.
I think there's a few things that made it work, at least tonight. Number one, and I think it's a big one, is when Carlisle comes off the bench, it's a little bit easier to find him minutes with the ball in his hands. Find him possessions, I guess, is a better way to put it, with the ball in his hands, because if Carlisle's on the floor, the likelihood is at least one of Rice or Galloway is not. And then you don't have a situation where he's fighting a sort of a feature ball handler, if you want to think about it that way, for the ball. The flip side to that is part of the appeal, it seemed like to me in the summer of bringing Carlisle in, was he had all these good moments at Stanford. Some of his inefficiency was he's a freshman, he's playing for a bad team, and they asked him to do too much. Indiana's not going to ask him to do as much. A night like tonight sort of says maybe you should ask him to do as much, because he's 14 points on just 8 field goal attempts and 5 assists, 3 rebounds. I even like the foul trouble. I thought 1 or 2 of those whistles were a little bit tough on him. But just in general, I think it's the right decision for now. There's every chance in a month it warrants a change, and that's fine. That, again, flexibility is not a vice.
Yeah, and doing it matchup dependent isn't either. But I just think this team has looked better with.
It is another one of those things where it's with this team is are you going to wind up leaving yourself too many questions to answer in a short space of time? Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, you can't experiment. Your time has run out.
Well, but it's more kind of the idea that, again, it's okay if teams continue to develop over the course of the season. They should. If they don't get better over the course of the season, then they're going to lose when it matters. But it's more kind of the idea that the other side of that coin can be tricky too, where it's like if you're trying to do too many different things in the course of the season, do you wind up never filling up, the glass on any of it enough to really maximize what you're trying to do?
But don't you know what you're getting from Galloway? Isn't the only question is where Carlisle's most comfortable, or where you can fit him in and get him if they get this kind of bench performance, and we should say this is the shortest the bench has been all season, really.
Yeah,
and
he's done it a couple times. He did it in the Bahamas once, but I mean, it's three-man bench.
The only injury was Gabe Cupps, so it wasn't like the other guys weren't available.
Mm-hmm.
So 8-man bench, minutes pretty evenly distributed. I don't know how much of that, like I said, was Rice tweaked an ankle kind of in the first half, but
also Woodson. I mean, he had a couple, Woodson has said many times he goes with the guys that are playing well. Tucker and Carlisle were playing well. Rice did seem a little bit limited in the second half. Galloway didn't have his best day, so Woodson just kind of says more Rice or more Carlisle and Tucker, because that's who's playing well.
So, but just an interesting sort of debate. I think it'll be ongoing until, Woodson sort of closes the door and saying this is what we're going to do. I mean, he doesn't have to. He could say we're just going to rotate it throughout the rest of the season. As long as you keep guys in a good headspace, I think Galloway is a good player to be in the spot where he's going to be able to handle it either way.
Yeah.
Right? And Carlisle's kind of the question, he's a little bit younger, but tonight he said, he's good to go. He'll do his job, whatever they ask for. You want to empty seats?
Yeah, no. People asked about the crowd, and I was going to scroll over here when we had a free.
Isn't it going to say sellout no matter what?
Yeah, it's going to say sellout, and it does, or very close to it, 17,222. I mean, it was not a great crowd, to be honest. I mean, it filled in a little bit, which is unsurprising because 6:30 is kind of an early start time for people trying to get down from Indianapolis or, getting out of work a little bit late. And I mean, they left early, but guess what? Crowds leave early. You're up 15, 18 points. People got to get home. It's a Monday night. It's not like this was a ranked win. again, like it was kind of a boring game, and boring in a good way from Indiana's perspective, but like it was just sort of like it was just a game. If you
well, aren't they all just a game?
but if you flipped out Minnesota, put Miami of Ohio in,
it was the same.
I think it was the same. Yeah,
Well, no, Miami of Ohio played better.
they did, frankly.
So yeah.
So I mean, like anyway, the crowd wasn't great. Student section was probably. I mean, the lower bowl student section was, I would say, 3/4 full, maybe a little bit more. Remember that most of those balcony seats that were empty are students. Again, I think that speaks to a little bit this fan base's attention is still pretty intensely directed toward football. That's part of it. But part of it is I think this team, kind of has to win this fan base over a little bit after last season, and then sort of continuing on to the Bahamas. And if they can win, if you actually look at it, I'm going to pull it up here. Forgive me for the on-air admin. If you look at their schedule, they're at Nebraska on Friday night. I have no idea what to expect from that game after Nebraska just got thumped by Michigan State the other day. They lost by like 20-something points or 30-something points. But if they could win that Nebraska game and then obviously close out the calendar year with 2 wins and beat Rutgers at home, that gets you to 12-2. That gets you to 3-0 in Big Ten play going into Penn State. Like, you do start to maybe feel like this team is for whatever happened in the Bahamas. At the end of the day, those are games in November that, again, how many times do you see Indiana, not just Indiana, basketball teams look bad in November, and we say, oh boy, that's don't know what that's a bad, and then we get to February and March and they're fine. I mean, famously in this place in '81, Indiana goes to, I think it was a Diamond Head Classic in Hawaii, and just plays terribly. They lost to UT Pan American, which is now UT Rio Grande Valley, and they won a national title. It just, at the end of the day, those are just games in November that they don't mean a lot to the course of your season if you don't let them. And I think Nebraska is the kind of game that can maybe start to lend the idea that Indiana is regaining a little bit of control of its season.
Well, you really know, we're looking at the schedule now. It's these 4 games here, kind of that January stretch where.
Yeah, I mean, they've got to make hay early. I mean, the Penn State game at the Palestra will be tough. Iowa has been a difficult place for Indiana to go the last 3 trips. But like, your next 5 Big Ten games are at Nebraska, Rutgers at home, Penn State at the Palestra, USC at home, and Iowa away. You can maybe even extend that to Illinois at home. That's probably a game it's a toss-up for Ken Palm. That's a game you might feel like you need to win if you're Indiana from a tournament perspective. You kind of need to make hay while the sun shines a little bit, because you hit that's right before you hit like the teeth of that road run that's really difficult, that kind of culminates with, what is it, like Purdue away, Wisconsin away, Michigan at home, then Michigan State away. Like, you kind of need to lay the groundwork early in your conference sort of restart. I guess first the Nebraska game Friday, and then early in your conference restart, so that you don't hit that stretch feeling like you need results. But again, I don't know. I see it with this team. I can't guarantee you that it's ever going to kind of come together, but I see it with this team. I just not.
You see what?
enough.
You just see.
I see windows of what? Yes.
I mean, that's where we were to start the season. So It's not a great.
A month in.
You should probably see it more. Or you want the brighter to outshine.
You want more consistency.
Yeah. That's where it's true. And I don't know, and because Mike Woodson won't talk a lot about it, in terms of like sort of like these stretches where the effort's been the question, like, has he made the right sort of, figured the psyche of this team out, sort of like get the most out of them? Yeah.
Well, and that's why I come back to, like, just, you're trying to make a lot of different stuff work. You're absorbing a lot of new pieces. You've got kind of this dynamic where you can play big sometimes, but small sometimes. You're trying to play faster. You're trying to do some different things offensively, because you've got more tools. And
what's their bread and butter right now? Well, you really can't answer that question.
Yeah.
What's their identity? You can't answer that question.
Is it possible that we get to a point in the season where it just sort of feels like Indiana gave itself too much?
With the game on the line, who takes a shot?
I think it probably goes to Rice. I think it's a ball screen, Rice, Galloway, someone like that.
That's interesting. I would say I'd go inside to,
Well, yeah. Well, in this game, I would.
Well, just in general, like, who's their guy, right? Like, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know yet.
We'll leave it there. Nebraska on Friday. We'll probably do one of these midweek at some point, talking more about the football matchup, and then maybe a little Nebraska talk. I don't know, but for now, he's Mike Niziolek, Herald Times. I'm Zach Osterman, Indianapolis Star. This has been Mind Your Banners postgame. Thank you so much for watching. We'll talk to you soon.